U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets and Controllers designated 4 members of an Islamic State of Iraq, or I should say an ISIS cell operating in South Africa, slapping them with sanctions in the last 24 hours, following a recent terror alert in Sandton warning of a potential attack in South Africa. That attack was issued, or the alert was issued by the Americans through their embassy here in South Africa. Treasury, this is the U.S. Treasury, is targeting key individuals, it says, who are alleged to have businesses that are supporting terrorism in South Africa. Let's speak about this with Willem Els, who's an expert on this issue. He's with the Institute for Security Studies. Willem, welcome back to the program. So, as someone who studies the movement of these terror cells and related organizations, how surprised were you to hear that this was going on in South Africa at this scale?
Good afternoon to you. If you look at the recent history of what has been going on in the Durban area as well as here in the Gauteng area in the wake of the recent warning here, but also in the wake of the arrest of the terrorist cell, the ISIS cell at the Kliprivier here near Vereeniging. We also have to think or to look back at the so-called Houma trial that took place in Durban area after the attack on the Ottawa mosque in Verulam, where this ISIS cell was arrested, and that went to trial. They were also linked to the extortion of the Woolworths outlets, the IEDs that were placed there, as also the extortion racket at the Durban July. So that has been coming for a long time.
And just as you say that, Willem, you mentioned the fact that one of these men, the alleged leader Farad Houma, was among the people arrested, charged in relation with the attack on the Verulam Mosque in 2018, I think it was. And that case was basically thrown out on a technicality to do with delays. So they were never basically had a court say that pronounced on their innocence, right? The U.S. says these are people who would have been or are in the country operating to attack U.S. interests and U.S. allies. Would it be a reach to say that even the Verulam attack perhaps may be linked to the broader work of ISIS?
Yes, I think you are right in your assessment on that. Because just remember, the Houma case was thrown out of court due to, and if you look at the verdict of the court papers, then it was due to really incompetence on the side of the investigating officer and also on the prosecution, and that came out very clearly in the court. So that court case was botched due to the let's put it, incompetence of the investigation officers as well as the prosecution, and so that does not mean that these people are innocent or guilty because they've never been to trial. But we know that they had a very strong case against them, and that trial, in that case, the prosecution as well as the investigating officers had the opportunity to rebuild that case, and they could take them to trial at any moment. But there was another incident as well where Mr. Houma and some of his compatriots were arrested with some firearms and other incriminating material. But once again, that case was botched because the police failed to obtain the necessary warrants in order to do the search and seizure, and that case was also thrown out again. So that does not mean, because the police is botching these investigations, it does not mean that these people do not have anything to do with ISIS.
And what would be the obligation on the South African authorities from a surveillance point of view? I mean, these suspected ISIS members are not just accused of aiding and abetting the group's activities through business interests and the rest of it and planning attacks on the US-linked interests, but if they are here in our country, what does government have to do to make sure that it knows where they are at all times?
Yeah, I think, it goes back a long way. We also remember the so-called Henry Oka case, where the leader of the MENT terrorist organization in Nigeria was arrested here in South Africa because the attacks in Abuja were planned and also facilitated here from South Africa. He's currently serving time in our prison. But I think maybe the time has come that we need a better political will from government in order to actively prosecute these people, because it came out in the press as well with investigations that South Africa became a safe haven for these organizations to run freely in South Africa, and also to use South Africa as a hub where they collect and facilitate financing for the acts of terror in other countries. So yes, I think it is time that we maybe rethink our strategy. We maybe rethink our political will on how to tackle these things, because at the end of the day, it seems that the Americans came out with this warning after maybe they did not receive the desired cooperation from the authorities here in South Africa.
And in the designation now from the U.S. Treasury are 8 businesses, they say, linked to these individuals. And I don't know if you've seen any detail of this, but would these have been businesses that are operating legitimately or more underground? Because I ask that because if they legitimately registered, you have to wonder how that registration would have been done and what their business actually would have been.
Yeah, what we see here is, these people make use of legitimate businesses. They register them, they pay their taxes, but also they siphon the funding and the funds for these organizations then from that legitimate businesses. We know that they use, in this case, some construction companies were involved, etc., etc. They can make use of any type of business. In the past, we also saw that some of these people made use of, for instance, second-hand car dealers, that they establish this business and they use it as a front, but then they channel funding to these illicit organizations.
Which brings me to my next question. Why South Africa is a, quote, favorable destination for an organization such as ISIS, as far as members who come here then to funnel money out to other extremist members who are in various locations in the broader African continent?
Yeah, I think there might be various reasons for that. One of that is that our financial systems in South Africa is really very advanced. It's some of the advanced on the continent. So they can facilitate a lot of the movement of money from here. Secondly, because of the economy that's so big, and also because maybe the policing and the intelligence is not on the standard that it's supposed to be to counter these type of action that they do, that maybe facilitate. They know that they chances of them being apprehended, being prosecuted are very slim, and that open up the doors for them to facilitate. We know that in the past, for instance, there were some rumors that even the last major attack in Kenya was facilitated financially here from South Africa. So that's not something that is new. It's something that's been here, and because of the conducive conditions here in South Africa, these people will keep on coming back here.
What about then, Willem, the risk in South Africa of the grooming and recruitment as well as radicalization of young youth? I mean, I remember in the mid-2010s when we saw a lot of attacks in Europe, places such as Belgium came under attack, Paris as well, when we heard about how these young men had basically, in either their late teens, early 20s, then been radicalized, and much of that went undetected until they'd caused so much harm. Is it likely that then the spread of their work in South Africa domestically goes beyond what's been captured in this U.S. statement?
If you look at the modus operandi of these organizations, especially ISIS, is that they tend to infiltrate your places of worship, and especially where more radicalized preaching is allowed. And then also they target the youth. We got information that they target the youngsters as young as 11 years old in the different madrasas, where they start to radicalize them for their purposes. They also do radicalization of women and also of youngsters. They really have a very broad spectrum of their radicalization that takes place. It takes place in their Friday preaching. It also takes place in the madrasas as well.
Willem Els, good to speak to you with the ISS.